Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Tech Bite, APM and DevOps driving application performance up to cloud scale, brought to you by Riverbed and presented by Slashdot Media. I'm contributing editor Michael Krieger, and as business increasingly moves code to the cloud, both public and private, performance in an increasingly complex environment grows ever more important. Today, application operations, or DevOps, has emerged as a key role ensuring that increasing dev and execution stack complexity doesn't translate to user frustration and departments seeking their own IT solutions. And that's what we're going to talk about today with Russ Elsner, Senior Director of Product Management for Riverbed. Just a bit about Russ before we get started. Russ has overall product responsibility for Riverbed's APM suite, where he provides strong technical depth and the science of performance analysis and a deep understanding of both network and application stack technologies and how they interact. Prior to Riverbed, he was a member of the senior strategy team for APM at OpNet and was a software engineer at Hughes Network Systems. Russ, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely, happy to be here.
So let's start off by taking a look at AppOps, DevOps, whatever you want to call it, what's in the job, and look at this list that we have here, this monstrous list of some of the things that are doing. What's the most important thing that someone who is going to be in one of these positions has to think about?
Yeah, this is actually reflective of what's happening in the industry, is that as applications have gotten a lot more complex, the overall structure, their mission in the enterprise, the role has evolved to be more of a holistic owner of the entire application, not just a silo technology owner. So yeah, this reflects a lot of the different pieces that need to coordinate the different teams, to own performance across all the different technology stacks, to be able to track compliance with SLAs, facilitate the various processes, whether it's change control or release process. So it's a very involved role, but it's really needed for the modern application.
Well, it's just amazing when you take a look at the different responsibilities typical in a position like this. And really, it's not a shock, but you take a look what's happening in the world of technology today. I mean, we have some of these, big buzzwords. You hear big data, you hear cloud computing, of course, BYOD, mobility. All of that brings a new level of complexity. And how does, is complexity the enemy of, operations?
It can be if you let it be, but you need to, if you're going to embrace the complexity that's coming with the modern applications, you really need to have to change your processes. So it's important that if you're going to go down any of these paths, which have pretty good benefits to them, that you understand what you're getting involved in and you organize around being able to take control of this complexity rather than it having dominating, your world.
I take a look in particular at BYOD and mobility. I mean, it's not just that everyone has, 2 or 3 different devices they're dealing with today. It's the fact that they're all different. This has to put an incredible strain on people who are trying to get performance up. They're just not even understanding what the endpoint is.
Sure, absolutely. People can be coming in over their phone, over their tablet. Maybe it's their own personal, phone from home, or they're coming in over a laptop they have up on the road. And so the different ways that people access internal applications, and then think of the external facing applications, e-com. If you're an airline and you have you're doing flight reservations, people might be coming over a mobile app or a website, and just the diversity adds a whole new level of complexity to track, manage, optimize, understand.
Well, so, obviously there's a challenge in there. The question is, when does that challenge become a problem? What is it that that says, Houston, we have a problem? Is it just because, the boss is complaining that his email's slow? What is it? What's the trigger?
Yeah, it's almost never, it should never be that. Really, the idea that a lot of these applications, the key driving factor should be user experience. Are the users of this application, whether they're internal users or external customers, what is their experience? And that becomes the real driving metric by which you can judge success or failure. In the end, if you're not serving your end customers, the application is effectively down. Now, how do you learn about that? Is that by people, dialing a phone and calling and yelling at you, or is that, you measuring user experience yourself? Clearly, we would advocate that you should be actively tracking user experience across all this different diversity of devices.
And of course, now you take a look at applications, it's not a piece of code anymore. It's a collection of moving parts as we have here. It's third-party databases. It could be open source components. It could be stuff you've written, commercially off-the-shelf software. It's really difficult to get all that stuff to work together.
Yeah, that's definitely the truth. Actually, I have a particular customer I work with a lot that, you think of them as a single web application, but actually they think of it as 80 different interrelated applications. There's parts that deal with inventory and fraud control and taxation at different countries, and all 80 of these different applications have to be working in order for that service to be delivered. So what the human sitting there out just at a web browser, ordering things doesn't realize is that the sheer complexity of all those different pieces have to be up and running for the whole thing to work.
So how much of this is something that users participate in, other than the fact that they're the ones who tell you when something's wrong? Can they help here, or is this something that's just between the developers and DevOps?
It really does. I mean, they ultimately become the canary in the coal mine. They're the ones who judge the success of your application, and internally it's through just complaints and satisfaction and productivity. Externally, it's by possibly leaving your service and going to a competitor. So they're the ultimate judge of performance, but there's not a lot they can do about it. In fact, you always hear sort of the stereotypical "the network is slow," basically used to blame just about anything. And so the users have very little visibility into what's happening. So other than being the judge of success, it's really up to the operations staff, application operations, to keep the application up and running.
Gosh, that's not fair, is it? They get to complain about everything, but they don't get to help solve the problem. So that brings us to
Exactly.
Survey says top 100 people answered, top 5 survey answers on the board. Complaints from users, occasionally, regularly, always, or never. It always is and regularly comprise the largest piece here. So is it just that users feel like bitching and moaning all the time, or is there valid reason for the complaints that you see?
There's some of the bitching and moaning aspect of it, but in general, no, users are very correct in the fact that many of these applications, many of which would be deemed business critical, don't perform all that well, right? They are either slow perpetually or slow sporadically, or they're unpredictable. And it's a real frustrating event when you're trying to get your job done and the applications supporting you aren't there to help. That's obviously the internal side of it. If you're an insurance agent and that you have to sign on 10 new customers that day and the application won't let you, you can't do your job. If you're trying to buy something at an e-com site and the site is slow, or you're showing errors or complex, you're just going to move on somewhere else, and so you'll vote with your wallet. So absolutely, I mean, it's very fair, and I think this is a bit of an indictment on the fact that we've embraced the complexity of a lot of the modern trends without building up a lot of times the apparatus around there to manage the complexity and to deal with performance.
So let me dive into that a little in some of the key factors, and complexity is certainly one of them. One of the big things of this world of cloud and virtualization we've seen is the fact that an execution stack can change from instance to instance. You may have something that's running, in your data center at this moment, and in 30 minutes it gets cloud bursted out to Amazon or something else. I mean, how do you possibly code for that?
It's a challenge, and it's one of the premier challenges of our generation. And it's an important to embrace the complexity, understand it. I mean, that's a key piece, is understand all the moving parts and what the relationships to each other are. That example where I mentioned that the company who has the sort of the 80 moving applications that are all individual services, once they started digging into and looking at the performance aspect of it and actually applying some of these techniques, they started noticing, I didn't know my piece of code talked to your piece of code. That's shocking. I didn't realize that was going to happen. So maybe they need to be near each other in the deployment. And so you can build best practice rules and operational guidelines about what things can move up to the cloud, must move up to the cloud together, which pieces should and shouldn't be dynamic in nature. And so it's a really important piece to understand the different interactions. And you absolutely can get cases where separating two servers by a few milliseconds could cripple the overall performance. You need to know that and build that into your operational plan.
And so you might really have to start considering even physical placement of things within your data center to understand where latency issues and the number of hops involved can actually become, at some point the speed of light does become an issue.
The speed of light becomes an issue very quickly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the things about cloud computing. It has some very, very valuable benefits to the overall organization, whether it's the ability to be dynamic scale, control costs, be more resilient, be more dynamic, but it does come at a cost that you're now sending communication over possibly larger links, and the speed of light's not going to change. So as you get the benefits of cloud computing in one direction, you have to be aware of the risks in the other direction. So it's an important trade-off, and that's why performance engineering and performance management are becoming really hot disciplines in the market.
Let's talk about testing a little bit, because obviously that's, a lot of code goes out there and they haven't tested for all these instances. Are there tools to help you do that, to help you understand the different execution environment, the interaction with other applications, all these hidden problems?
There should be. And in fact, if you think about a best practice, you should absolutely put performance testing as part of your release process. Unfortunately, in reality, that's the part that often gets cut. As development cycle lengthens and the release date comes close, what's the one thing that tends to get cut? It's the performance testing that, you have to do scale testing, you have to do functional testing, but what's the performance of this under different environments? A lot of times that winds up being cut out, which means that the first time your application ever exists in any sort of realistic form is in operations, and then you run into problems. So it's classic sort of short-term thinking about getting a release out the door without building enough performance testing in. And clearly we think that's sort of the wrong approach, but what happens is you wind up, essentially, if you don't deal with performance up front, you're going to have to deal with performance on the back end.
It's the classic cheap, fast, good, pick two.
Yeah.
You have to give up on something, and if it's fast, maybe it's the testing that you have to give up on. We're seeing more and more people relying on different database tools. A lot of open source databases are out there, the NoSQL variants. Are having all of these different other underlying supporting applications making it easier or harder to develop performant code?
It's going to be just like any technology. It has both pluses and minuses, and there's never a single magic bullet. You don't have a single silver bullet that makes things go away, and that's the key to any of these technology decisions, is that you wind up getting some benefits in some areas at some additional complexity or at some additional risk. And as long as you know that and you're open-eyed about going into that, it's manageable. And in fact, you can get all the benefits without exposing yourself to more risk. A lot of times people sort of adopting some of these buzzwords without thinking through the implications on the back end, and what it's done is increased complexity, increased your risk exposure without getting all the benefits. And so that's the worst part, is that if you wind up getting all of the downside without any of the upside. So as long as people go into these open-eyed and take advantage of the new technology while mitigating risk, they're great new technologies, and they really have fueled a lot of the amazing developments we've seen out in IT recently.
So, let's talk about the WAN just a little bit, because when I think Riverbed, of course, WAN optimization is your roots and your history. Are there some particular best practices when looking at performance management that come to the WAN and WAN optimization and other facets of what you guys do?
Sure. I mean, oftentimes people think, when they think WAN, they think bandwidth. They think, how much bandwidth do I have? How big are my pipes? And there's this, especially from the application side of the culture, essentially bandwidth solves all problems. But most of the network people, that would come to that would understand, just like you said, speed of light is a constant, and you wind up having to deal with it. And so being able to understand the effects of latency and be able to mitigate that, whether it's through an active technology like WAN optimization, where you actually have hardware in path that can mitigate the effect of latency, whether it's to your own data center, your private cloud, or even up to the public cloud, but also be able to write applications that are not don't expose the effect of latency. So an application developer can write code that goes back and forth between two servers 5 times, or they can write the same code to go between those servers 50 times. The 50 times is going to be much less tolerant to the effects of latency. And then as you start deploying up in the cloud, that's now a risk area. So having the culture of developers understand the new environments their applications will be running in, that it's just not, you can't accept the fact that everything's going to be gigabit Ethernet with, half a millisecond of latency. You have to be tolerant of, higher latencies going up to the cloud or between components as they, as you burst pieces up into the cloud. So it's a change in mindset, but it's certainly a learnable lesson.
So yeah, I mean, thinking about chattiness of any protocol obviously is one of the big things that's going to come to play is we become more of an increasingly a cloud-based universe. I mean, it's interesting to me, Russ, because I started as a mainframe programmer, and it was all cloud back then. All we had were dumb endpoints, and I take a look here. We are 40 years later, and wait, what the heck? Back to the future. So keeping that in mind, as you take a look at where we're going to be, what are some of the things to keep in mind for our viewers today when they're looking for the APM solution for themselves? Give me some parting words of wisdom, would you?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, I think the first thing is that you want to be able to keep it simple. Is that you want to have a fewer number of tools that can speak to more audiences, and the idea that everybody siloed tool for their own little piece of technology, that's very, very old style thinking. But you have different teams. You have database teams, network teams, application teams. The developers themselves having sort of a single source of truth allows a simple deployment of performance management, which means that you all can sit around the same set of data. So I think simplicity in overall monitoring is an important piece. Absolutely think that as you start looking at hybrid, public, private cloud deployments, you definitely want technology that can follow you. If all of a sudden you have an initiative to go up to the public cloud and start deploying up on Amazon, to find out that your performance tools can't follow you there is quite disruptive. So keep that in mind as you start choosing performance management tools. Is are they going to be able to follow me based on the trends that maybe right now we don't have a strong public cloud initiative, but we're maybe one CTO away from going that direction. So making sure you have tools that can follow you there when you're going. And then the last one I always think is important is understanding the overall cost of deploying these types of tools, is that as you start scaling up or as you start scaling to different environments, understanding what the cost structure is, both in terms of just raw dollars for the tools themselves, as well as how much time you spend care and feeding, is that can very often the training or learning aspect of performance management it can be a pretty big drag. And if you have tools that nobody knows how to use, they're not really doing a lot of good. So the whole cost of ownership, including not just the technology, but the maintenance, the training, keeping it up to date, I think it isn't another important part.
And with that, we're done with today's Tech Bite. I want to thank our speaker today, Russ Elsner, Senior Director of Product Management for Riverbed Technology. If you haven't seen the other Tech Bites in this series, you can certainly do that, or just surf over to riverbed.com/product solutions, products application / performance management, that very short URL you're seeing on the screen right there. Click on that for more information to find out more. Once again, I want to thank Riverbed for making this Tech Bite series possible. Thanks to Russ for being here. For Slashdot Media, this is Michael Krieger. Thanks for watching.